there could be a problem, and whereas 80% of the people facing that problem see it as a problem and complain about it, the one person that looks at that and says, that's an opportunity for me to do something about it, is the entrepreneur. Botswana is an entrepreneur's dream. Why is it an entrepreneur's dream? Not because it has the biggest market, it has a tiny market, but it's got a lot of problems to solve. Yeah, and if you can solve those problems, you can take those solutions and you can then attack a much bigger market, a market of 200.
Hello, everybody. My name is Arun, and today we are interviewing an astute entrepreneur, the co-founder of Alpha Direct, Mr. Arun P. Iyer.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. Before we started recording, you said that during your days, you believed everything was possible. Now let's deep dive into that mindset. What cultivated you to have that mindset of, okay, I can do everything. There's nothing that can limit me from being an entrepreneur, a business person, whatever.
Yeah. I think, I remember my dad telling me that, Walt Disney had this saying or statement that he made saying, if you can dream it, you can do it. And so I think I was always encouraged to have a lot of dreams about the things how I wanted my life to be. And I was first and foremost not afraid to have those dreams. And, I think I was fortunate. I had a really good supportive family that gave me that backdrop on which to dream. And then to have the conviction in what I believe is turning my dreams into reality. So if you look at, my life so far, everything that I've done has been a result of having a dream and then having the conviction to go after that dream and turn it into reality. And it's not that I haven't failed. I've failed many, many times. So I've failed sometimes at ideation stage where I have this idea, this dream, and unfortunately, doesn't take off, or I just kill it at idea stage. And other times I have a strong enough conviction about the idea or the dream that I feel I can make it real. And so the where I get my happiness from is in making my dreams come to reality. And so along that vein, and I think this is where they say success breeds success. Somewhere along the line, I had a dream that became a reality. And that reinforced my conviction that I'm capable of turning my dreams into reality. And then even, for example, in the early days of Alpha Direct, many people didn't believe that we would be able to turn the dream into reality. But by that stage, I'd already built up the confidence after having turned a couple of dreams into reality to believe that I can do it.
Nice one. Now, as you were talking now, I had this urge to know how it all started, especially on Alpha Direct. Yeah, what's the story of this?
Yeah, it's a good one. So when I was 9 or 10 years old in Lubatse, and as you can imagine, in Lubatse, those days, there was hardly much. I don't think there's still a lot to do in Lubatse, but I think that in those days, you can imagine we had two TV channels, if we at all had those. We had TV1 and Bop TV. There was no DSTV in those days. And, so my pastime was reading these magazines that my dad would subscribe to, and dreaming about what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted to become. And somewhere along the line, I read a biography of Warren Buffett, who...
Oh, yeah, the rich guy.
Yeah. So more than rich, I think it's just how he did it. Like Buffett, in one generation, built one of the most incredible corporations that have ever been built in the world. And I mean, Berkshire Hathaway controls huge swaths of the global insurance and reinsurance markets, and also has investments in companies from Apple to Coca-Cola, great brands that were created over time. And I was quite inspired by that. I bought my first stock, Sechaba Brewery Holdings, when I was 9 years old.
9.
Yep. Sechaba IPO'd on the Botswana Stock Exchange at that time. My dad had received the prospectus and was lying on his desk, and I went to his office. I would hang around his office all the time, and I would go to his office on the weekends, and I look at this prospectus, and I said, Dad, are you going to invest in this? And he was like, no, not really. And I was like, can I invest in it? And at that point, I'd saved up about 900 pula. That was my my gross savings in my life, and so I took that entire bank balance that I had.
And invested.
Yeah, and I invested in Sechaba Brewery Holdings. So I wasn't old enough to drink, but I knew that Botswana were going to be drinking many, many years into the future, and that it would be a good business. But anyway, I read Buffett's biography, and I would read all these annual reports. And then, interestingly enough, when I came to UB, there was a friend of mine called Pex. Him and I would invest. So, I think I was about 15 or 16 years old. He was probably 18 or 19. And we used to go every day. We used to walk from here to, Capital Securities in those days. And we used to get the sheet with all the stock market prices. I mean, those days, it was the early days of the internet. So we hardly had internet access. We used to do things a lot manually back then. And we used to go and track these companies. And what we used to go a step beyond, because obviously in university, you have more time than you do when you have a family and you're working and all that stuff. So we would do a lot of fundamental research. So for example, if we were investing in a bank, we would go and sit down in a bank branch the whole day and we'd study how do they treat their customers, how are their systems and processes, are there people who work there happy, are they doing a good job, those sort of things. And then we'd also do some fundamental financial analysis, like what are their ratios looking like on their balance sheet and stuff. And we'd nerd out over investing in companies. I know it sounds quite odd because our, friends and colleagues at, UB were focused on, girls, and the girls were focused on the boys. We were focused on stocks. And along the way, we invested in Botswana Insurance Holdings Limited, BIHL. And we analyzed the financials of BIHL, and Pex and I were both like, man, this is such a good business. Like, we should somehow figure out how to get into this business. And Pex told me back then, he says, hey, Warren Buffett actually generated the capital to invest in all the companies that Berkshire bought eventually from the insurance business. So somewhere along the line, something got planted into my head. Buffett, insurance business, good business, got to get into it at some point. But I had no clue how. And then I went to the US after graduating from UB and did my master's and took the US CPA exam. And then I acquired a small practice there. To cut a long story short, I spent about just under a decade in the US before moving back to Botswana. But after all those years, and as fate would have it, after my dad passed away, I acquired a firm in Orlando. And the guy who sold me that firm, a guy called Sandy Stokes, he sat me down one day and he said, look, Arun, let me tell you something. I've been in practice for, 25, 30 years at that point in time. And he says, I've made more money from selling insurance than I've made in all the years of practice. And I've only been selling insurance for the last 5 years.
Really?
So he said, please get licensed and get into this business because I think you'll do really well at it. So there's a shout out to Sandy Stokes. Thanks for giving me that impetus to get it done. But so I decided to get licensed and started selling some insurance in the US. It was primarily life insurance. And I sold a policy to a client of mine, Mike Kozep. I still remember him. He had just sold his business and he wanted some tax advice on how he could use the proceeds. And we said, okay, you can set up this pension plan, you can have life insurance in the pension plan, etc. And he did it. And the premium was about $30,000. And I got paid a $30,000 commission. My insurance agency got paid $30,000 commission in order to sell this policy. And then I get a call from the company that I placed the business with. And they're like, hey, we'd like to invite you for our annual conference in Santa Barbara, California. I said, yeah, cool. And they said, our travel agency will get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And they did. Next thing I know, I'm flying first class to California. I land in Santa Barbara. There's a limo at the airport to pick me up.
Nice.
Go to this fancy 5-star hotel. We had Jeb Bush was the speaker at this conference, George Bush's brother, the president. And we had, like top class entertainment, like I think it was Sting that was the entertainment at this conference. And every night I'd come back to my room and I'd see, you got to be part of the chairman's club. If part of the chairman's club, you get to go to Scotland. We're doing a cruise next year.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like how? And then I attended the presentation by the CEO of this company. And at this presentation, he talked about how the company had just made like close to $1 billion in profit that year and all that stuff. And I said, man, this is such a good business. Pex was right. I got to figure out how to get into this business.
You're getting inspired.
And I got inspired, and I got to figure out how it works, because I did the math, right? I can do basic math. So I'm like, $30,000. I sent $30,000 to them of my client's money. They gave me back $30,000 as a commission, and then they spent another, I don't know, $20,000 on, wining and dining me and taking me on this trip. And I'm like, the math doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up. So how does it exactly work? And then around the same time, or slightly before then, I got involved. My brother was running a medical billing company in Tampa Bay in the US.
Yeah.
And they were going through a big software migration. And the software migration meant that, there was new regulations that were coming out in the US about electronic medical records and stuff.
Yeah.
And he had to modernize their systems. And the software that he chose to buy, the company that built that software was owned by a guy called Dr. Kiran Patel. And Dr. K, as we call him, he was born in Zambia, grew up in Zambia, and then went to the US in like the 70s. He's a cardiologist by trade. And his claim to fame at that time, he had just sold his company, WellCare, for about $400 million. And and he was a big philanthropist in the Tampa Bay area. So he had become the largest donor to the University of South Florida and all that stuff. But we didn't know him from a bar of soap. So the guy who was the MD of that software business, he told my brother that, hey, our company is owned by Dr. K. So my brother's like, who's Dr. K? He says, no, Google him. Googled him. And then next thing I know, my brother's messaging me. He's like, listen, we need to meet this guy. Like, we need a mentor and we need to meet this guy. So we arranged a meeting and we went to his office and we met with him and we hit it off. And literally at that first meeting, I told him, I said, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. I not only want to make it big in the insurance game, but I also want to have a plan to, like you, give away the vast majority of whatever it is that I make. And so I admired both his passion and drive in business, but also his passion and drive in philanthropy, like which I see as sort of the ultimate purpose of whatever it is that we're doing. So, and he also fortunately liked us. At that time, I think I was 23 or 24 years old. And my brother was even younger. But anyway, so I had all these different like elements in my life that were kind of pointing in a direction, right? I couldn't put the pieces together at that time, but eventually I ended up deciding to sell my firm in the US and move back to Botswana. And I went to Dr. K and I said, I'm planning to move back to Africa and I want to start something. And, I didn't know what it was at that point in time.
But you really have to start something.
And I searched around for a lot about what I wanted to do. Like, what's the rest of my life going to be? I was 29 years old when I sold my firm in the States. And I had no clue where I was going to go next, what I was going to do next. But something kept ringing in my head saying, you've always wanted to be in the insurance business. Like everything from when you were 9 has been pointing you in that direction. But I also don't know anything about the insurance business. Like I've never worked in an insurance company. I've never run an insurance, never owned an insurance company. So
it seems impossible.
So it's foolish to actually think that you can just enter an industry a highly technical industry and become really good at these things. So anyway, went along. Finally, I said, you know what? This thing has been pushing me, driving me in this direction all along, like the voice from within, you can call it. And I decided to just listen to it. And I was like, you know what? Actually, I think I'm going to do this. In hindsight, it was probably it was the path of most resistance. Like there's a lot of easier things you can do than start an insurance company. But it's my path. It's the path that I think was chosen for me, and it's the path that I've embraced and I've enjoyed like every moment of it. So that's kind of the genesis of Alpha Direct and what led to it. Of course, I can sit here all day and talk about the story. I think, the idea is to compress it so that, so because there's been a lot of hardships, there's been a lot of difficult moments throughout the journey too. But that's how it got started. It all started at the age of 9 when I read Warren Buffett's biography, and then the subsequent events that led me to eventually get to this point.
Interesting. And I'm a student of psychology. I study psychology in UB, right? And we learned that for you to actually understand an individual, a genuine individual, you have to travel back to their childhood and see how they grew up, how their perception basically is formed when they are young, right? So when you say that you started when you were 9 years old, it proves the point that, childhood is such a great thing. And I think I don't know if I should say parents or we as the community, we should try to make sure that we provide a safe hub, a hub that would allow children when they are growing up to be inspired, to have that mindset that, I'm destined for greatness, which is such a, should I say, powerful thought to have. Anyway, I want to ask you a question regarding childhood before we move on. How did it shape you and influence you to be particularly successful in BW?
That's a good question. I actually, when I left after graduating from UB, I left Botswana.
Yeah.
I never thought I'm going to come back. My mission was to never come back.
Yeah.
And the reason my mission was to never come back was because I thought, you know what, Botswana is I was very entrepreneurial, right? Like when I was at UB, I told you earlier, I had my own business.
Yeah.
I've had my own business since I was at LobSec. I was 13 years old at the time. And I've had my own business since then. So I've always been very entrepreneurial, very independent. And I felt Botswana was too small a place. Like I'm like, whatever business I start, I'm like, in 5 or 10 years, I'm going to saturate it and I'm going to be bored because there's going to be nowhere else to go. And in the 10 years that between when I left and when I came back, not only did Botswana change, but my mindset also changed. I now didn't see Botswana as the limiting factor. I actually saw it as the springboard for a much bigger market. You can call it SADC, you can call it Africa, you can call it the world. But my thoughts about what Botswana represented had fundamentally changed at that point in time. And that's what ultimately led me to want to come back to Botswana and do it. The other thing was, and what also changed at that point in time was my father's passing away.
Yeah.
So I lost my dad at a very young age. I was 23 years old. My brother was 21. And, it was weird because, that was like the biggest event of my life, like the real changing moment of my life, where I questioned everything. I questioned what was my purpose, what was my reason for doing what I was doing. And really had to take a look inside. And, I always say, like, yes, it was the most shocking and the worst thing to happen to me, but it was also the best thing to happen to me because it opened up possibilities which would not have opened up otherwise.
Yeah.
And I definitely would not have moved back to Botswana if my dad didn't pass away. Because he passed away, that gave me the drive to say, I have to do this and I have to do it here. And so it's a lot of factors. It's a little bit more complex than what I've made it out to be. But these are the primary things that changed for me in the 10-year period. I remember getting on the Air Botswana flight and like waving bye-bye for the last time at SSKIA, which wasn't the current airport. It was a much smaller old airport at that time. But I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, wow, like, I'm going to America and I'm going to make it in America. Like that was my dream. So that's how it is. I think, we can make all the plans that we want to.
Yeah.
But ultimately there's a plan already made out for us. And we're better off accepting that plan rather than trying to go against it.
And you mentioned the issue of your father's passing, and it reminded me of a quote. I don't know if it's a poem. I love poems, by the way, so I'm assuming maybe I saw it in one of the poems. It says, heroes and villains aren't born, they are created. A villain, when they go through pain, they'll be like, the world hurts me and I'm going to hurt it back. A hero will be like, the world hurts me and I'm not going to let it hurt people. And you, I assume you are a hero because, because the pain you experienced from your father's passing didn't change you to be, should I say, an evil person? If it's safe to say that word. So I want to know, because you had the opportunity to go through and to choose an evil path or the path of light. What made you choose the path of light and success?
I think to cut a long story short, it's really spiritual awakening, right? Like, so I would consider myself to be very unspiritual prior to my father's passing. I was a topper at UB. Most of my life, I was academically very, very bright. And I think that it led me to believe that it was me that was doing everything. And, I think that tends to happen when things are given to you easily, which it was for me, because it's not that I was any more intelligent than anybody else. I actually was just a good test taker. So I could sit and study. I always studied last minute. So, I would, not that I'm advising anybody to do that, but, I was always the guy that studied last minute and scored like really well because I think I had good test taking ability and good memorization ability, but it had nothing to do with intelligence. But I believed that I was just better. And I think that arrogance, if you will, was just sort of toned down, and I was shown a path that was much more fulfilling. And I think, I have to go through some tough times to get there, but I feel like if you have the right support system and if you can sort of reason with yourself as to why certain things happen at certain times, then you'll come out a better person. And ultimately, that should be our goal, right? Like in life is to keep becoming a better person as you go through life. So you always have that choice, right? You always have the choice of light or evil or darkness, right? At every juncture in your life, you have that choice. And it's a test at the end of the day. Like, do you want to, you can choose the path of darkness at any moment that you want. I think, to me, part of it is just grace. I think I was very fortunate that my positive thoughts were reinforced much more than my negative thoughts. And that's also kind of how I'd been brought up, right? So if you to go back and look at my family, we were always encouraged to think very positive about everything. Like no matter how bad or good things are going, just be optimistic about the future and believe that things are going to get better.
Yeah, and you remind me of a quote from Jim Rohn. He said, a positive mindset is an ingredient of success. Actually, I'm not sure if he said it a lot, but I watch him a lot, so maybe it's him. Okay, I want to know, how did the culture context of Botswana and its economic landscape, how did it shape your perception towards business in general? And how did you thrive in this context?
So look, what does an entrepreneur do? An entrepreneur solves problems. They see opportunities where other people see problems, right? We could look around at UB and we could say, okay, there's a subset of the population here that's faced with a certain problem. Maybe the refractory makes horrible food. I'm not saying they do. I haven't tasted that food in a good 20 odd years, right? But I'm saying, there could be a problem. And whereas 80% of the people facing that problem see it as a problem and complain about it, the one person that looks at that and says, that's an opportunity for me to do something about it, is the entrepreneur. And so that's really the skill set that I bring to the table, right? I see the world from a different angle, and I see opportunities where other people see problems. So if you look at the insurance industry, we've been complaining for decades that there's low penetration of insurance, not only in Botswana, but across Africa and many other parts of the world. We've been complaining about it, but I'm not interested in complaining. I'm interested in seeing if there's an opportunity there. And if there's no opportunity there, then I move on to the next problem. So Botswana presents a very interesting combination, right? Like, I honestly consider it a unique privilege to have grown up in Botswana, because Botswana has got a lot going for it, right? Like, we've got this this history of having been one of the poorest countries in the world in 1966, and actually being one of the only countries on the African continent that's taken those resources coupled with good governance and actually translated it into education, healthcare, a good standard of living for the citizens of Botswana. So I think it's a good example of how to build a country, right, that's got resources. And then secondly, I think Botswana, to me, at least the Botswana that I grew up in, was a very diverse and cosmopolitan place. Like, growing up in Lubatsi, I had people in school who were from everywhere and anywhere in the world. And because Botswana had so much opportunity, there were so many people coming in from around the world who wanted jobs, who wanted this, wanted that, and that created a lot of diversity and diversity of thought. And to me, that exposure is really, really important. So, when we got that exposure, I think that was a huge, fortunate thing. But also, because it's a country that's on an upward trajectory, or it's been on an upward trajectory for so long, there are so many problems to solve. So from an entrepreneur's perspective, I keep saying this. I even said it to somebody yesterday. Botswana is an entrepreneur's dream. Why is it an entrepreneur's dream? Not because it has the biggest market. It has a tiny market. But it's got a lot of problems to solve. And if you can solve those problems, you can take those solutions and you can then attack a much bigger market, a market of 200 million people, or a market of 1.3 billion people, if we consider the African context. And we have a relative sense of safety and security and stability here, which is rare. Like, I don't think we realize how rare it is to have safety, security, and stability. Like, to not have people rioting the streets when there's an election, or back in the day we used to have a lot of riots at UB because of allowances and stuff. But the thing is, if you take the context of Africa, Southern Africa, most developing countries, I think we've got a fairly stable ecosystem here.
Nice.
So the question, so for me, it's a perfect place for an entrepreneur to play, and you can make mistakes here, and the market is very forgiving. You can learn from your mistakes and perfect your product, your process, etc. But I think anybody who's building something from here needs to have that regional and continental and global context in their mind.
Beautiful. There are a lot of things you say during the break that captivated and intrigued me. And when you were saying them, I remembered the name of your company, Alpha Direct Insurtech, and I focus on the tech part. So I want to know, how did technology and AI influence and involve your company to thrive?
So the tech part of Alpha Direct is really my brother. He's the guy he's the driving force behind the pivot that we made. Both of us grew up similar environment. We both studied accounting at UB, and we both went on to do our masters in accounting, and we're both US CPA. So academically similar path, but I think both our brains are wired completely differently. So I am a finance brain. Like I understand the insurance business extremely well, innately. Like
in and out.
yeah, I'm passionate about it. I get it. Like I understand how reinsurance works and how treaties work, and I've now, having worked in the industry for 10 years, I'm fairly good at it. And like I am very passionate about insurance and finance, my brother is very passionate about technology and operations and processes and systems. So we've both built the business together as partners, doing the things that we are most passionate about. So he came up with the vision, and he came to me one day and he said, "Listen, if we are to build this to what we want to build it to, we need to build our own technology." And he then proceeded to start spending money which we didn't have, to hire a team and start building Graphite, which is our core system, and took us down a whole new path. So in my view, my job was then to figure out how to raise the money so that he could do the tech piece, and he could build that technology future, which was his vision. So the long and short of it is that we knew that technology is the future. I didn't have the tools or the vision to know what we should do exactly to get us from where we were to where we are today, and where I think we're going to go in the future. But all the credit goes to Arjun. He really had that vision of this is what we can do, and then he built the team, drove the project forward, and then built the business around it. So that's really his vision, and we made that pivot, and we're better off as a result of it. In terms of AI, we've done a few rudimentary things here and there, but nobody, including us, knows how far this can go. Right? In my view, it's something that's going to change every industry forever. And the insurance industry is no exception to that rule. In terms of the Botswana context, Africa context, I think we're well positioned to leverage AI to build the business of the future. I don't know how that's going to happen exactly, and it's partly because I think we don't have the issue of legacy systems, right? So there was one of our competitors recently that attended this Botswana tech conference, and they'd posted on their social media saying that we're so digitally advanced. We have this WhatsApp chatbot, and you can buy insurance online. So I was a little surprised because we launched online insurance 4 years ago. You can go on our website. You can buy an individually underwritten policy online, 100%. You can pay for it online. Your policy documents are delivered digitally, and the whole thing works seamlessly with our system. And then we also sell, we're probably one of the biggest e-commerce players in Botswana, because we process many millions a month in transactions, on 100% digital transactions. So I was surprised. So I went on their website and I was like, I looked and I found a callback form. And I was like, that's not selling online. So partly a lot of these guys like have serious issues because of their legacy systems. And to us, that's a huge competitive advantage. So I think we're going to have an opportunity in terms of how this plays out. But that's where we're headed with this.
Yeah, nice one. Also, another question is, how can I, or the youth in general, how can they build a multi-million dollar company in Botswana?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you need to identify a big industry that already exists within Botswana. So there's a couple of industries that are naturally big, like retail is one of them, right? Like fast-moving consumer goods are a big industry. I think probably in the region of about, I don't know, formal retail might be about 20 billion.
That's a lot.
And informal is another probably 20 billion or 30 billion. So there's a lot of potential in retail. Like it's a big business. And then insurance is another one. I think the insurance industry in Botswana is about 10 billion pula all in all. banking is another big industry, probably around the same, maybe 6-7 billion. And like this, there are several like billion pula industries, because you need to be able to come into an industry that's already like there's already demand for what it is you're trying to do, and then you need to be able to do it better, cheaper, faster, make it more accessible, make it more affordable, so that people can come on board and grow that industry. So first things first is identify a very big industry. I see a lot of business plans, so I do angel investing, and I backed the first e-commerce venture. It unfortunately went under, but backed the first e-commerce venture ever to come out of this country. I did the first safe note investment ever to be done. There's no safe notes in Botswana. It's a Silicon Valley concept that we brought here. And I see these business plans come through all the time. And the first thing, there was a guy that wrote to my EA today and sent his business plan and said, this is what we want to do. And I called my EA and I said, okay, tell me, why will I not invest in this business? And she said, she came up with a whole bunch of reasons, all of which I didn't agree with. So I said, actually, look at this. I said, this guy's trying to raise 5.5 million pula. And his market size for what he wants to do in Botswana is 5.5 million pula or 5.2 million pula. So I said, is it realistically possible for somebody to invest 5.5 million to do 5.2 million in turnover and then make a profit of, 500,000 on that? Like, when am I going to get my money back? These are the basics that we have to get right. You have to go after a big market, right? So short-term insurance is about 2 billion. Medical health insurance is about 2 billion. Life insurance is about 6 billion. So I'm attacking a huge market that I can expand into, and I can take, even if I can take a 10% market share, I'm going to be at a fairly big, business volume, right? So in my view, starting point is identify a really big existing market that has got scope for disruption. So when I looked at insurance, apart from the fact that I was very passionate about insurance, I saw a lot of inefficiencies. I saw a market that was very relaxed. I saw a lot of players that were just fat cats, mostly foreign-owned companies, so mostly South African and international companies that looked at Botswana as a branch. So they were like, whatever, who cares if this branch does well, it doesn't do well. As long as we're sucking the money out, that's what we care about. And so they operated very inefficiently, and they operated in a monopolistic environment, oligopolistic environment, right? Like, so I've heard that like before Alpha Direct started, all the insurance CEOs would meet at Bull and Bush on a Friday for, whatever, lunch and beers. And they would say, these are the prices that we're going to set. And then all of you guys, go back to your offices and instruct your teams that these are the prices for the different risks. So everybody was making a lot of money at the expense of the consumer. And it was a big enough market that if we could disrupt it, that we could change the game. And since we came in, the profitability has dropped. A lot of the big players still complain, wherever they can, that no, but we must stop competition. We must make it harder for people to start new companies. And I'm always an advocate of, I'm hoping that somebody will come and start the next Alpha Direct and disrupt the industry again, because that disruption is really good. Like, if you look at how much the industry has grown and how much we're going to grow it, it's grown tremendously since we started, even with our disruption and so on and so forth. So I want to always encourage new innovative players to come in. I want to keep the barriers to entry as low as possible. And then, try and win through innovation and hard work and that sort of a thing.
Yeah. So let's say I've identified a market, for example, manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm visionary. I want this to be, should I say international or globally, right? I want my business to be globally, to affect the global market. Then I don't have the resources, for example, financially. What can I do to lure in investors to pour their money in my business?
Very good question. So I think that's one of the things that I've done fairly well at Alpha Direct, because there's no way that I would have had enough money to do what we've done. Like, I'd have to be extremely rich already. And if I was extremely rich already, then I would have a lot of better things to put my money into than an insurance company that takes 10 years to start making money. But anyway, so the convincing investors is about a few things. So first thing I spoke about was the market. How big is the market, right, for this? And you have to be both ambitious and realistic about this at the same time. So every young entrepreneur wants to go out there and portray that, oh, like Africa is my market and I can conquer the whole of Africa. And yeah, sure, it's 1.3 billion people, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't have a license to operate in all of those 54 different countries. You only have a license to operate in Botswana. So you have to be, you have to say, look, this is the total addressable market. But then you have to narrow that down into what we call, SAM and SOM. So there's TAM, SAM, and SOM.
Yeah, SAM and SOM.
TAM is the total addressable market. SAM is your serviceable addressable market, which means with what I have today, how much of that market can I realistically get if I was to get every customer that wanted this product? And then your SOM is your share of market. So that's out of this serviceable addressable market, how much can I realistically expect to win with my current distribution, with my current capabilities, with my current And that is the way you think about a market. So very important, I think, for especially our young entrepreneurs to understand how to think about a market. Sure, I can say Africa is a $70 billion insurance market. Can I attack that entire $70 billion? No, I can't. Because I don't have licenses in all these countries. I have to take it stage by stage by stage. So maybe my TAM might be 70 billion or 100 billion or whatever the number is, but I have to narrow it down based on what I have at me today. So that's number one. Then number two thing that an investor will look for is how your solution addresses the need or the problem differently from what is in the market. So differentiation is very important, right? So if you look at Alpha Direct, our initial differentiation before we made our technology pivot was direct distribution versus intermediated distribution. So we told customers, if you come directly to us, you don't use a broker or whatever it is, we'll save you 15% on your insurance. And we ran a lot of campaigns. I don't know how old you were when we were running those campaigns, but whatever it was, we ran a lot of campaigns saying, save 15% on your insurance, come directly to us. So distribution was one thing that we had as a differentiating factor. The second thing that we had as a differentiating factor was our processes. So for example, we were the first to build a supply chain for auto parts in this country. So most people, most insurance companies, all insurance companies prior to Alpha Direct starting would simply, if you were their customer and you had your car was insured by them, and then you had an accident, they would tell you, go to 2 panel beaters and get quotations and bring it to us, or 3 and bring it to us. And then they go with the lowest one and then they send this to you. Obviously, this model was resulting in a lot of fraud, but more importantly, it was not the most efficient model. It put the burden of running around and getting quotes and doing all this stuff on the customer, rather than on the insurance company. So we said, why should we put our customers through that? Let us source all the parts that are needed. We'll have a panel of repairers, and we will, send the work to this panel of repairers, and then we will get guarantees from this panel of repairers, which we'll pass on to our customers. So putting the customer first was very important, but having a differentiation was also very important. So an investor is going to ask you, why should your product win versus the status quo in the market today? And then third is the team. Why should you and your team, or however small it may be the team that is going to crack this problem on a big scale? So if, and this is where maybe I fall short a little bit, if you've worked in an insurance company before, or you've run an insurance company before, or whatever it is, and then you're saying to an investor, hey, I've already done this before, I'm going to do it better this time when it's my own company, then that might hold some weight. I obviously didn't have those credentials when I came into this, so I still don't know why the people that wrote me the checks in the first place. But at the end of the day, a startup venture, right? People don't really invest in ideas, contrary to what people think. People invest in ventures. People invest in something that has already taken an idea and shown to some degree what that idea can accomplish. And I think it's really, really important for young entrepreneurs to understand, especially when they're pitching to investors, that it's important that they must portray a level of confidence in their ability to execute, because there's a billion good ideas. Honestly, I had like I had probably 100 ideas before I hit upon Alpha Direct, but it's not the idea that makes the difference; it's the execution that makes the difference. And yes, there was no way for me to know that this team was going to come together the way it did and execute the way it did. I can't take credit for the execution entirely. In fact, I could probably take a very small a portion of the credit for execution. But that initial execution, your investors have to believe that you can get through that grind. And I like what Mr. Mohobe talks about, because he talks a lot about entrepreneurial grit. And one of the things that I will look for a lot in somebody that I'm going to back, because end of the day, that's what people are investing in, right? My friend Lerang tells me this all the time. He's like, he invested in Alpha Direct, and he tells me this all. He's like, I didn't invest in Alpha Direct. I don't know anything about insurance. He runs a mining services business. He's like, I invested in you because I believe that you have the grit that's going to take this business, and no matter what you face, you're going to get through it and get to the other side. So the point is, you have to demonstrate that grit, that you have that grit. And I don't know how investors make a lot of judgments about these things, because it's not like I can look at you and say, yes, you have a lot of grit, or he doesn't have any grit. There's no, on the surface, there's no differentiation. So I think it's important to highlight in your deck, in your pitch, why you have the grit, you have what it takes to get through the hard times, because those hard times are coming, for sure. I've seen that time and again.
I remember I was doing first year, right? I was doing first year, and I joined this entrepreneurship development program in the university, right? So investors came for just, should I say, for respect, I won't mention their names. They came, and for some reason I was nervous, right? I was scared. I was supposed to pitch my ideas, and we were in line, right? I think I was probably maybe the fifth to fourth last person to pitch, right? Now I'm comparing myself with them. It's like, hey, these guys are nailing it. How can I surpass this? Because they set the bar so high, right? Then my time came and I fumbled. I was stammering. I didn't get anything. Then I sat back. I introspected a lot and realized, okay, Lefika, maybe your problem is communication. Communication is key. With communication, you can sell yourself. And I was observing you when you were speaking. I noticed that you don't say you are very articulate. So how can one become an articulate speaker and just be a guru of communication?
Yeah, good question. I'm also very nervous, believe it or not. I do say a lot of ums, actually. It's something that I've had to work on. I'll put it this way. When it comes to, I did my first real pitch in 2018. I was selected by Stanford Seed to pitch in front of 30 venture capitalists at their conference in Nairobi. And I couldn't sleep for a week before that. I had to go to my doctor. I had to get I've never had a problem sleeping my entire life.
Yeah.
That 1 week, I couldn't sleep. Like, I was so nervous that I just said, you know what? I went to my doctor's house in the middle of the night, and I was like, listen, I haven't slept for 3 days. Give me some sleeping pills. Yeah. And he prescribed me some sleeping pills. And I just KO'd after that for like a whole day. And after that, I woke up and I'm like, okay. And for a week, I had to take sleeping pills. It was the worst thing in my life, the worst experience, having to take sleeping medication. But when the pitch happened and it was fairly successful and all that stuff, it took away some of that nervousness. So the next time I was in there, I was much more confident. I knew that I had the stuff. Yeah. So oftentimes, our nervousness, our apprehension is because of what other people will think of us as.
Oh yeah, true.
That's oftentimes what it is. And whether things are going to go our way. And I think it's important in those moments to just realize that nothing is in our control. Like, absolutely nothing is in our control. So the important thing is to do your best in every moment and know that there's a destiny for you. Like, no matter what that destiny is, there's a destiny for you. And to embrace that destiny, to live that destiny, to walk the path of that destiny. Um, and to be honest with yourself. So don't think that I'm not somebody that has never been nervous or has been able to be articulate and all this stuff. It's bollocks. I'm just as nervous as you. I've gone through the ringer and emerged on the other side. Fortunately, right? Didn't let it take me down with it. Didn't let it become a permanent issue in my life. But everybody has got that. It's not. There's no difference between us. We're all subject to the same things.
Okay. Another question: how did self-awareness and introspection evolve? How did self-awareness and introspection evolve your vision or your, should I say, risk management skills in Alpha Direct? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Let me try to make sense of it. I don't know whether it'll be what you're looking for, but I would say that I'm, for me, it was self-awareness came as a result of trying to find purpose. So, I went through this phase of my life where I didn't really know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. The vision of myself was kind of fuzzy, and I always had a very clear direction in my life up until that point. And at that point, it was just like there was a cliff and I didn't know what was beyond that cliff. So that was both a scary point in my life, but it was also the best time of my life. After my university days, of course, that was number one. It was the best part of my life because by seeking purpose from within, I was able to build a picture of myself that I believed in. And I don't believe anybody else around me believed in that vision at the same time I did, because a lot of people asked me a lot of questions that showed me that they didn't believe that I could do it, that I could reinvent myself. But I knew it somewhere inside me. I knew that I can pull this off. And even after I did believe that and did go down the path, I did question myself many times to say, am I sure that this is the right path to go down? But fortunately, I always reassured myself that, yeah, you know why you did what you did, you know why you made your decisions, and that's the reason why. And that's the reason you are where you are. In terms of, so for me, that introspective nature, that introspective ability, the self-awareness came from a crisis. I was the most unself-aware person prior to losing my dad. Yeah. After losing my dad, that event forced me to look. So I had two choices, right? Like, and we spoke about this during the break about embracing your good side versus your evil side. Yeah. I had two choices at that point in time. I could either, wallow away in self-pity and say, oh God, I lost my dad. There's no point. Why would, and sort of get lost in that world. And that involves sort of looking externally. So, I could look externally for validation, for purpose, etc. Or I could go in. I could go inward. Yeah. And to me, the greatest blessing was the decision to go inward. I was telling my mom about this too. I was like, the true blessing that I got in my life was after my father passed away, choosing to take to spirituality rather than to external motivation, right? Choosing to go within, like whatever that may look like, but choosing to explore who I was and trying to figure that out. And that brought about the self-awareness. And it has helped tremendously from an Alpha Direct perspective, because that self-awareness influences your decisions on a day-to-day basis. So what I find is that I don't get upset when people backstab me. I don't get upset when people disappoint me. I don't get upset when people don't act with the highest level of integrity, because I'm self aware and I'm aware that they are also on a journey. I'm also on a journey, and maybe they're just on a different path and they need to go through that process in order to make their journey more meaningful. So it helps you to deal with people. And to me, any successful business, any successful entrepreneur, their fundamental quality is that they'll be really good at understanding people and dealing with people. All the technology in the world, all the capital in the world cannot make up for people skills. If you can gather together how many ever people, 100 people, 200 people, 500 people, and you can motivate them to do something in a singular focused direction, you'll be a successful entrepreneur no matter what.
Yeah. And you made me think of a method of job analysis. And it made me wonder, what's your method of job analysis, or should I say employee analysis, that you use to make sure that you hire people who would not act as a drawback to your company?
So, first and foremost, I believe in young people.
Yeah, the youth.
The youth. I believe that, because I know what I was when I was, a lot younger. I still consider myself to be young, but
You're still young.
relatively maybe still young.
Yeah.
But I like people who are in their 20s, their teens, those sort of people, because they bring a certain energy to the equation, which is very infectious. And I like to be around that energy. It's the reason I do a lot of these talks and go around and meet with people, because I love that energy. I love hanging out with young people. It brings back a side of me that I loved, the side of the explorer side, the side that believed that anything is possible. So I like that young, infectious energy. And then I always look for attitude over anything else. Attitude is really important. Like, how is this person going to deal with failure? How is this person going to deal with being put down in an environment? Are they going to sit and cry about it? Are they going to bounce back and deal with it? And I watched an interesting study, which I shared with my daughter as well today, that speaks about this. University of Florida, I believe, in the US, did this study about it was an academy in Florida that did a study about the top 25 tennis players in the world. And they analyzed the differences between the top 5 and the remaining 20, and what makes a top 5 player versus a top 25 player. And of course, their economic fortunes are vastly different, right? If you're top 5, you're like making millions. If you're like top 25, you'll get by, So these guys, what they figured was, one of the things they figured a lot of things, but one of the things they figured, which really struck out at me, was how the top 5 deal with failure versus the other 20. And it's the top 5 were able to quickly move on from hitting a bad shot or making, making a mistake. The other 20 were not able to move on. So in terms of talent, they're practically the same. But in terms of their attitude, the way they dealt with failure and those sort of things, that made all the difference. So I'm always looking for that, because I want the top 5 on my team. I don't want the top 25. I want the top 5. And so I'm always looking for people who I believe can be resilient, can face failure, and can emerge from that failure and with a new attitude to succeed. So that's number 1, always. I do look at aptitude, but not aptitude from the perspective that you might think. So I look at people's scores. I look at what they scored, because that gives me some sort of barometer of whether they're serious about what they're doing or not. But I don't really care what somebody studied. So I've hired people in Alpha Direct that studied computer science or IT, and they handle claims. I have people that have studied, social studies, history, whatever, and they study and they come and do underwriting. One of the most successful guys is a mentor of mine in the insurance industry is a guy called Junior Ingolube. Junior Ingolube is a Zimbabwean guy who is an agronomist by profession. Okay, so he's studied agriculture. He rose to become the CEO of Munich Re Africa. Munich Re is one of the largest reinsurance companies in the world. They back Alpha Direct. They're our reinsurers. And Junior actually signed our first treaty. And I've had several conversations with him later about why he did that and so on. But that's for another day. But Junior is a great guy. I mean, and he's got this vision, and he eventually ended up becoming, after Munich Re, he became the CEO of Sanlam Emerging Markets. He expanded Sanlam into every African country through the acquisition of Saham. He now sits on the board of Sanlam, the board of Continental Reinsurance, and several other things. Very well accomplished guy. But you can just imagine this black Zimbabwean agronomist sitting at the top of a German, sort of white-run company in South Africa, telling all these insurance and reinsurance professionals how they should be doing their job and directing them and guiding them. And so Junior's story tells me that it doesn't matter what you studied. It's about what's in here. It's about your passion. It's about
the heart.
It's about the heart. It's about what you're driven by. Now, don't get me wrong. Junior is an extremely intelligent man. Like he's not stupid, or he's not even average smart. He's like crazy smart.
Genius.
Yeah, he's crazy smart. But he's not an insurance guy, and he made it to the top. And so whenever I do get an opportunity to meet with him, I always
excited.
Yeah, I always get excited because he sheds so much light into important things. So for me, those are like sort of the important criteria. And I like to not hire people who come with too much experience and too much bad habits, because those are not the people that are going to reimagine an industry. Those are the people that are going to keep the status quo going. And I'm exactly the opposite of the status quo. Like, I want to be on the opposite side of the status quo always.
Nice one.
I mean, if I'm not changing things, then why be involved?
The last two questions. What is the biggest task, or should I say risk? Let me embed it into one question. What is the biggest risk you ever took when trying to scale Alpha Direct? And when you did that, what is the biggest challenge you faced? And how did you solve, or how did you overcome that challenge, and how did it change your perspective or perception?
Yeah, there's a very clear one. So I don't have to think long about this. 2019, Arjun came in and met me and said, "Listen, we've got to build our own tech. That's where we're going." And I said, "Okay." And we started. We hired a software development team. We started building our our systems, and I remember sitting in Arjun's bedroom at like 11:30 at night, and we always get together and brainstorm about things. And we realized that night in his bedroom that at the rate we were going, in 3 months we would be bankrupt, because we'd spent money that we didn't have. And we realized that, okay, we need money, and we need a lot of it. So we needed to raise about 10 million at that point in time, or we made the decision to raise 10 million, but we had no clue how. And that was a huge moment for us when we had this vision. We knew we wanted to make it, we could make it, but we just didn't have the resources to get there. And our existing investors at that point didn't believe that this vision we would actually be able to execute on it. So they refused to give us the money. And then we toyed around with a couple of ideas. So you must remember at this time, like it's nearly the end here, right? Like we in the next 3 months, we have to pull off something in order to keep this going. And by this stage, there's already, 50, 70 people in the company that are counting on us. of course, most people are blissfully unaware that we are actually 3 months away from bankruptcy. But anyway, we toyed around with a lot of ideas. We said, you know what, we have a brand. Like, at that stage, we'd been in business for about 4 years. So we said, we have a brand. Why don't we put an ad in the newspaper and try to just invite the general public to invest in our business? Like, everybody knows Alpha Direct. So maybe people would just take the checks and write us checks, and then we would raise the money that we need to go do this. So we were like, yeah, that's a great idea. So essentially a public issue of securities. So we called a lawyer friend of mine, and we were like, this is what we're planning to do. Is there anything we need to be aware of? He's like, are you nuts? And we were like, no, why? And then he was like, well, you can't just put an ad in the newspaper and advertise securities for sale. Like, that's a violation of securities laws. And you'll probably end up in jail. So we're like, oh, damn, like that's not going to work. Then we said, okay, let's call up all of the accounting firms that we know. They all have clients, and they know who has how much money. And we came from an accounting background, and my dad was also a chartered accountant. So we knew what accountants know about their clients. And so we started calling up all these accounting firms, and we said, hey, you guys have clients who have money. Don't you think some of them would be interested in investing in Alpha Direct? And they said, yeah, sure. We do have lots of clients, and they do have lots of money. Where's your IM? So we're like, what's an IM? And they said, an information memorandum. We're like, what? What's that? And they were like, no, you got to have an IM, like something that says what your business is and what the investment represents, et cetera, et cetera. So we're like, oh man, like, how do we go about an IM now? And fortunately, at that time, I remembered that Dr. K, this guy that wrote me my first check and so on, when he flew down to Botswana for our first board meeting, this was in 2015, he sat me down. I booked him a room at the Grand Palm, and he sat me down in the couch in the lobby there, and he said, look, let me tell you something. You need to learn how to raise money. And you can raise a lot of money in your local community. Like, there's people out there with lots of money, and they have no ideas, and you have ideas, so you should go get the money. And he said, talk to John. There was this guy who was running his PNC company in the US, and he's like, just talk to him. And he's been raising money in the local community in Tampa Bay. He just raised $10 million for his insurance company. So talk to him about how he did it. So I kept that in mind. I called John. Now, this is 4 years before we are actually having all these conversations. And I said, John, I need some info on this. Dr. K said this. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll send you this document. So he sent me the document, the Word document that he had used to raise $10 million in the US. And I remembered that this was sitting in my Gmail, in my inbox. So I go back into my Gmail inbox and I open this document, and lo and behold, it's an IM, it's an information memorandum. So I took all the names of his company out and I put Alpha Direct in there. I still have a copy, the last copy, this 100 and something page document. And then I hired an attorney locally who reviewed the whole thing for me, edited it, made it kosher. Yeah, kosher and legal as per Botswana law. And then I just went out and I just gave this IM to everybody and anybody that I knew had money. And I said, can you invest? And soon enough, it was very quick. We had raised about 4 million pula. And then I took that and I went back to the existing investors and I was like, I've already got 4 million. So, now you want in or you don't want in. So we kind of, by the hair of our whiskers or whatever they call it, we got out of that situation. But that was quite frightening. And even after we raised the money, there was a time period where I didn't know if we were going to make it, because all the ideas that we had to deploy that money were not working. So to get it from there to now where it's thriving business is growing has been nothing short of a miracle.
Yeah, beautiful. One last question, and I want you to think deep when you answer this one.
It is called Deep Dive for a reason.
Yeah, it's called Deep Dive for a reason. How do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as a good person first and foremost, like somebody that actually cared about something other than themselves. I really do believe that I do care about people. I care about our society here. I care about people, who live here, and I do care about Botswana. I really want to see Botswana. I want to be remembered as somebody that made a difference in Botswana's trajectory. We're at this junction now, I think, which all of us are aware of, where our future is not as certain as our past has been, right? We know that the diamond industry is under a lot of pressure. We know that there's a lot of hard times ahead, right? And I'm hoping that I can play a role in, being part of that journey, being an important part of that journey, like somebody who we were going down this cliff, and I mean, and you can't do it on your own, but I'm saying, like, I want to be somebody that's a catalyst for change, somebody that helps the country to transform and transcend this sort of inevitable cliff. And I think part of that comes from me reading a story recently about my grandfather's brother on my mother's side. He, interestingly enough, he was in India. His name is Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. He's won not the Nobel Prize, but there's a World Food Prize, and he's won the World Food Prize. And he's got a research institute named after him. And there was a New York Times article about him when he passed on. He recently passed on last year. And one of the things I read about him, I mean, I've heard about him my whole life, but I've never met him. My mom met him. And, he was studying, I think, math or physics. And this was like just after India gained independence from the British. Yeah. And there was a lot of population experts in the West that had written an article or had written about India. And India was faced with a lot of famine and food shortages at the time. Yeah. People were dying of starvation. And they had written that the only way that India would, and this will tell you about the arrogance of the West as well, but the only way that India would be able to crawl its way out of this quandary was mass genocide.
Oh, that's crazy.
So they wrote about this. These are population experts. So they said the only way is they just have to like kill off a certain portion of the population. Otherwise, they would starve to death. And my grandfather essentially quit his studies in physics and shifted to agricultural science. Yeah. And he then brought what's known as the Bolo varieties. Bolo was a scientist who won the Nobel Prize and created the World Food Prize. Mm-hmm. He brought the Bolo varieties from Mexico to India, and he created what's called the Green Revolution in India. Yeah. And he's known as the father of the Green Revolution. And not only did that make India self-sufficient, but today India exports food as well to the whole world. So it feeds 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion people, and also exports food to the rest of the world. So to me, that's a very inspiring story because it shows you that one person, if they truly have it in their heart that they want to do something, they can change the world. And so I think, to me, if I can be half like that, if I can at least have an attempt of doing that at a Botswana level, I think that would make me very happy. And then, last is, I think, I'm an entrepreneur, like through and through. Like I want to be remembered as somebody that advocated for entrepreneurship as the solution to a lot of our problems, and somebody that holds the mantle of entrepreneurship high. So people should look back and hopefully have a better view of entrepreneurs. We spoke earlier about, people feel like millionaires and billionaires are bad people, evil people, whatever it is. I would like to prove that to a lot of people that you can do well by doing good. And they're not mutually exclusive. So That's what I'd like to be remembered as.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, we have learnt a lot from our CEO and co-founder of Alpha Direct, Mr. Arun. Can we give him a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
Thank you guys for watching this episode. We really hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Deep Dive is dedicated to bringing you the most comprehensive and engaging information about business, personal finance, and personal development. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated with all our latest content. If you like this video, give it a like to show your support and help us reach a wider audience. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and your family who may be interested. Sharing helps us grow our community and connect with like-minded individuals. Leave a comment below and give us your biggest takeaway on this episode. If you're interested in being a part of our live studio audiences, make sure to register for the next show.